I'll go ahead and kick us off. My name is Jan Thomas. I'm a training coordinator with the Center for Technical Development, or the CTD, and I am pleased to be here to help host and moderate today's webinar on rain gardens with updated strategies on installing them and with examples from the Puget Sound region. As we were just discussing, the CTD exists to help provide training and professional development opportunities for district staff, as well as help facilitate the sharing and networking. So I just want to give a big thank you to Haley for bringing this webinar idea to the CTD, and remind you all that if you have ideas or projects or programs that you'd like to share out, please do reach out and get in touch with us, because we'd love to hear from you and help coordinate a webinar for your topic. Couple of quick logistics. The webinar is being recorded and we will post it to the CTD website along with the slide decks. That'll be in the CTD training library section of the website. We're in the meeting format, so everyone has their own controls as far as mute and camera. So please do keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question. We are going to hold questions until the end, but when you're ready, you can go ahead and pop them in the chat box and we'll monitor that. You can also just raise your hand and we'll call on folks directly. I think that's all I have. So I will turn it over to you to get us started, Haley.
Oh, thanks, Jan. All right. Okay, can everyone, here, let's hide this. Hide video panel. Here we go. All right, can you see my screen, Jan?
Yep, looking good.
Okay, awesome. Well, hello, everyone. My name's Haley Rocco, and I am a project manager at the Snohomish Conservation District for the Community Conservation Team. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you guys about rain gardens, a little bit about their role in our region and ways that we use them at the district to further the district's mission, but also to help further the efforts of our ag and habitat and floodplains team. And so I'll do that by talking a little bit about rain gardens and then providing an example of a project that we just wrapped up here at the district. And then I'm going to turn it over to Curtis, who is going to talk a little bit about a really awesome resource for our region, the Western Rain Garden Handbook for Western Washington, which was originally written 10 years ago. And so we have 10 years of lessons learned that we're rolling into updating that handbook. And so Curtis will talk more about that. So there we go. So when you think of the Western Washington landscape, this is what comes to mind for me. And so in this landscape, we have an established canopy cover and then those layers of vegetation, and really importantly, a thick layer of duff on the forest floor, that spongy like duff layer that you can just feel when you're walking in this kind of landscape. And so another important part of our landscape is the amount of rain we get in Western Washington. So how that pre-developed forest landscape interacts with rain is that a lot of the rain is intercepted and then evapotranspirated back into the atmosphere. A lot of that rain is able to slowly percolate through the duff. It takes sometimes like days to weeks to recharge the groundwater and get to our water bodies. But really critically, only about less than 1% of that runoff in the pre-developed forests or rainfall is surface water runoff. So obviously our landscape's changed a lot. This most recent picture is 1996, so just like project a couple years beyond that to get to where we are now. But we're losing a lot of that vegetative cover, but also critically it's being replaced with impervious surfaces, has been the trend. In contrast to how rain interacts with the developed landscape, Ooh, this got wacky, huh? There's far less evapotranspiration and interception of rain. Sorry about this. There's far less recharge of the groundwater table, and a lot of that water is being taken away via surface runoff. So the trend in losing the interception, transpiration, and filtration of that rain system in the forested landscape to a system of conveyance brings up two critical issues of increased water quantity, because that rainwater is moving a lot faster, and decreased quality in that it's picking up a lot of pollutants as it moves through our landscape. So on the rain quantity, on the quantity bit, these really heavy flows can change hydrology and create flashy systems, especially in the urban areas, that can reduce biotic richness and cause these incised channels that wash away the sediment that salmon need to make redds, but also cause erosion on those banks that and those fine particles are also not good for salmon redds because they can fill in the gaps that the redds need in that gravel. And so to speak to the water quality piece, in the developed landscape, stormwater is typically minimally treated. And as a result, about 75% of toxic chemicals in the Puget Sound are from the stormwater washing in there. And so polluted stormwater runoff is the #1 toxic threat to Puget Sound. And this can mean that salmon can die within like 3 hours if they're exposed to stormwater. And we know that salmon are a really critical diet of our friendly orca. So one of the tools in the tool belt to addressing this problem in the region is green stormwater infrastructure, or low impact development. And there's several kinds of low impact development, like permeable pavers and green roofs and rainscaping generally. But today we're going to talk about rain gardens and their role in our region. So rain gardens are landscaped, excuse me one second. So a rain garden is an intentionally depressed area in the landscape that collects rainwater from roofs or driveways or streets to allow the rainwater to soak into the ground, and using natural processes like the soil media, and the plants to break down pollutants and allow it to absorb the water to absorb back in the soil. And so these are some of the benefits of rain gardens. They recharge local groundwater, provide habitat, reduce fossil fuel dependent lawns, and can be really beautiful to look at. And so some of the parts of a rain garden is we have the inflow, which can be directed from roof runoff via pipes, or just like a curb cut coming off the street. But they're usually they ought to be have these rock areas underneath them as the rain's coming in or the water's coming in, so that area doesn't erode. And then you have an excavated area where the soil is replaced with a bioretention mix, which is typically 60% compost and 40% sand, and really, really permeable, really good drainage. And then as the water comes in, it will fill up to a 6 to 12 inch ponding depth, depending on the design and need. And then once it hits that level, the water will overflow out of the rain garden. Again, important to line that with rock to make sure that the system doesn't erode there. So for some perspective, the average household roof is about 1,700 square feet, and the average annual rainfall in Lake Stevens is about 36 inches a year. So if I crunch these numbers correctly, that is about like, and the average roof has the potential to or Rain Garden has the potential to treat around 38,000 gallons of water per year, which is a pretty significant amount, especially in areas that are addressing non-point source pollution, which is a really critical pollutant in the Puget Sound. So knowing that the rain gardens hold this role in our landscape of addressing this problem, I wanted to provide an example of a project that we recently completed at Snohomish Conservation District, doing rain gardens in unincorporated King and Snohomish counties. So this project was done on from a grant received by the Department of Ecology, and we partnered with King County to complete it. And the goal was to install rain gardens on private property in these unincorporated areas. And the unincorporated areas were targeted because they may have been developed prior to stormwater runoff controls were required. So some overall outcomes of the project over the past few years was that we installed 16 rain gardens in 3 different clusters in King, and 1 in King and 2 in Snohomish County. King is in the White Center neighborhood, and then in Snohomish we have a cluster in Everett, unincorporated Everett, and unincorporated Snohomish. And the reason we like to install them in clusters is because it helps to maximize the impact in whatever prioritized subbasin you're working in, but also it helps that stretch that dollar further, because you can split the costs of the rented equipment like excavators and trenchers, but also you can maximize the loads of sod you're removing, taking to the dump if you can't find a place to recycle them on site. And it also helps with when you order materials for the rain garden, the delivery, you need a certain amount of yards in order to be delivered. So if you can cluster them and get the delivery and split the load, it's more cost effective than sending someone on the crew to run back and forth. So some images of our White Center. This is one of the 8 gardens that was installed in White Center in King County. So this is the during process where we've excavated the rain garden out and replaced it with that beautiful bioretention soil, and it looks like our downspout is about to get trenched in, and then added several inches of mulch and some drain rock in the inflows and outflows. And then the next step would be planting this one, and I'm sorry I don't have a photo of the beautiful plants in there, but you can imagine it, I'm sure. So that was one of the White Center projects, and now I'm going to just focus in on the Phobes Hill Rain Garden Cluster and some of the things that we did there. So to orient you all, we're looking at a map of we have the city of Snohomish, and we have the Snohomish River there, and the delta flowing out into the Puget Sound. And Phobes Hill is about right there. So some of the outcomes of the Phobes Hill cluster was that 4 rain gardens were installed at 3 different residents that all reported to receive like really high flows of stormwater, especially in the fall and the winter or wet times of year, which they described as a river of stormwater coming down. So we collected stormwater from both the roads and the roofs on those sites, and installed 4 rain barrels for irrigation in the dry months that will overflow into the rain garden in the wet months. So zooming in, we have our 3 properties here in that yellow rectangle, and you can kind of see a pretty distinct landscape divide, a difference in landscape management. So we have this uphill portion, so that orange dot is the high point, and you can see that's kind of a pretty developed landscape, and that's the Phobes Hill neighborhood. And then our low point on the map is down here by the Snohomish River, and you can see the left side of that purple line is really critical ag lands and also fish habitat. So we have, oh shoot, you can't see my mouse, but oh wait. We have the Swans Trail Slough coming down through here, which is really important salmon spawning habitat, and these ag lands. But so when stormwater hits, it's trending to take the polluted water from the neighborhood and wash them down into these ag lands. And flooding has been a concern in these areas, and that predictions show that the 2-year and 10-year floods are increasing, and that the area inundated by 2-year floods in this floodplain ag land area is expected to double by mid-century. I think, I don't have my notes, but I think that was it. So there is issues to be addressed down here are the quantity of water, because we want to reduce the flooding for the farmers in that area, and the quality of water for the salmon rearing habitat. So also to note, there is a cornfield down here that is in the shape of Washington that I would encourage everyone to go check out this fall if you're in the spirit. But this cornfield and the other ag lands down in this floodplain, need a resilient landscape plan in order to not have that flooding. And so I wanted to highlight a project that Snohomish Conservation District, our ag team and our habitat and floodplains team and engineering team are doing in partnership with Diking District 13, Snohomish County Surface Water Management, and then homeowners and consultants and a lot of other partners in order to maximize the drainage benefits to farms in that area, to have the greatest quantity and quality of habitat and reduce flood pressure in that area for farmers and fish. And so because of this project and the issues down there is why Phobes Hill was identified as a critical area to install those rain gardens, which is what we did. So here are some photos of that install. We have the crew putting in some rain barrels that will overflow into our rain gardens, and over here installing our inflow pipe. And then this is one of the 4 gardens. We have the before, we did one in her driveway area. This is the excavation and the after, and you can kind of see in this image there's a significant slope in this hill, and this is where the water was kind of cascading down. You can kind of imagine those stormwater getting pulled into that rain garden, or that's the intention, to filter out and settle there before, instead of popping down to the ag land. So this is a rain garden we did at the top of the hill. So we have the grassy before photo, and this is during the build process. Justin, our engineer, one of our engineers there, is checking the level of the dams, of the check dam, and then we have our planted after photo. And yeah, Justin's checking the level of a check dam to help even slow that even further, because this one was built on a bit of a slope. So some final thoughts are just that rain gardens are really key in developed and urbanizing areas, and we know that, but they can also be used to leverage the impact of our downstream goals and our floodplains for farmers and fish. And I think the Rain Garden Handbook for Western Washington is a really valuable tool in our region for expanding the knowledge around rain gardens, both for homeowners and professionals. It's a great resource. And I'm excited for Curtis to talk a little bit about the updates that are happening to that. But I will also just note that we will be doing a big bulk order to print that handbook. So if you're interested in getting a copy, you can shoot me an email, and my email's right there, and we can put your order in for that. All right, thank you. I'll hand it over to Curtis.
Interesting. Oh, there it goes. My camera was going off and then on and off and on and off and on. Great. Thanks, Haley. A wonderful intro. Um, and welcome everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Rain Garden Handbook. One thing I want to add is that I got to share my screen here. Let's see. Let's move back. Gotta get this thing going. So sorry. And a question, Haley or Jan, are you seeing my screen?
Not seeing it yet.
Okay. Let's see. Well, let's do this. There we go. All right. Hopefully now.
Desktop.
Get up. There we go.
There we
How's
go. That's great.
Are we there?
We're there.
Nice. Yeah, great intro. Thanks, Haley. We're going to talk a little bit about the handbook, the Rain Garden Handbook. One thing I do want to mention, it's actually, I know it was quite obscure, but there's actually 3 versions. This is actually version 3. The first one was, we started back in 05, 07, was right in there. I forget the exact date now, that's like way back there, but boy, that was done on a shoestring. I think we did that for about $5,000 or $10,000 with some help from a really talented watershed steward. Anyway, that was the first version. And then Department of Ecology wanted to bring the Rain Garden Handbook into their fold, given the new low impact development regulations built into the stormwater management manual now. And so for those of you that work with stormwater or follow that at all, minimum requirement 5 in the stormwater management manual is the sort of low impact development. They also call it on-site BMPs. And so I think back in the day, they saw ecology saw value in bringing that into their fold. So the last edition, 2013, ecology became involved, and they were part of the development of that manual. And you'll see a lot more language about, for if you have stormwater requirements for your project on your property, see this part of the manual, see Appendix C, or go to the stormwater management manual, which of course I think for for most people would be just eye glazing. I mean, it would be yeah. So I don't know how much value there was in that, but anyway, just a little bit of history there. And so now we're on to the 3rd version. And so this is very brief, going to talk very briefly, and hopefully then we can move into question and answers. I think would probably be the most fun part of this. But so why are we updating? What are the primary changes and the timeline? So as Haley mentioned, there's been, since 2013, and certainly since the very first manual back 05, 07, again, sorry, I'm forgetting that date, but we've gained a lot of knowledge, both sort of at the science end in developing new filter media, new bioretention media, and different ways of designing and building these things, as well as installers, right? I mean, we have installers in the region now, and their experience is really valuable as far as what they find on people's property, how to best implement these things. So we've tried to, incorporate that into the new version. What are some of the primary changes? Well, one is media guidelines. Now, this might seem like a minor change, but it's actually quite important. You'll see in the new handbook, given what we know about the compost-based bioretention media, ecology, of course, has well, not of course, I don't know how much you follow stormwater, but ecology has issued guidelines for where not to use compost-based media. And in our region, you often see that referred to as 60-40 bioretention soil media, and it's 60-40, 60% sand, 40% compost. So they've issued guidelines on where not to use that. And just to summarize, within a quarter mile of phosphorus sensitive waters, receiving waters. So we haven't included that language, but we've included a sort of a caveat or a guideline that for any property owners that are on the border streams or wetlands, to not use the compost-based media, but rather use just a topsoil, a nice sandy topsoil that has a low compost content. So one change there. We've spent a lot of time on the plant table, refining that. And I want to mention right now, I think I saw Peggy Campbell's on the call, and Peggy as well as others. This is not just me rewriting this handbook. There's a technical advisory committee, sort of a broader advisory group, and then we had a group that was just involved in the in plant recommendations. Peggy was involved really in all that, and just a huge contributor to this. So we've updated the plant table. Updated infiltration test procedure. We have a really competent hydrogeologist on the technical advisory committee, and so we've kind of updated that test procedure. And we've reduced the references to Department of Ecology LID requirements. This is just, again, to refer someone to the stormwater management manual. That's a homeowner. That's kind of silly, really. Really, where they need to go is to their local jurisdiction. If they have a building permit or they have a project that's disturbing a certain amount of ground, they're adding a driveway or they're adding, a certain amount of impervious surface, that really has to do with the local jurisdiction, and that's who they want to be talking to. So we reduce those references to ecology, referring folks to the local jurisdiction, and just sort of directing them to an appendix where all that stuff is located, rather than it peppered throughout the handbook. We've refined the order of the topics, and I think we've tried to better link the pictures. Using those pictures is really explanatory and linking with the text. We've tried to improve that. And then a big piece of this is we've simplified the sizing table. I would say on the first handbook, ecology was maybe a little over enthusiastic about the sizing criteria and how to go about presenting that. And this time, this edition, they're just much more relaxed about all that. So we went from this sizing table in the 2013 version, kind of eye glazing, to that. So much simplified. I don't think any reduction in accuracy and effectiveness, just much simpler. So timeline, we began in fall of 22. We've completed the draft text, the chapters, and that was wrapped up in about June, and we're currently working on the layout, all the graphics. Anyone who's used the handbook, it's graphic heavy, a lot of work there. So we're in the process of that right now, and in the final drafts. We're wanting to get this to ecology in October for their review, and then complete and ready to print in December of this year. All right, so that's it. I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. And well, Jan, I'll let you take it over from here, but I assume we open up for open up for question and answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Curtis. Thank you. And yeah, if there are questions, feel free to just raise your hand. We can just have a dialogue here, or if you prefer the chat box, we can certainly read those out for you as well. So yeah, questions, comments.
See, there's some.
A question. I am very new to the rain gardens. I'm in South Central Washington, so we don't have a lot of this in my area, more of a rural landscape as well. We are kind of on that divide. Is there a rain garden for Eastern Washington, Rain Garden Handbook for Eastern Washington, or is a lot of this, transferable to, I mean, we don't get as parts of our district don't get as much rain, obviously, as the Western Washington, but we still do have, stormwater control, I guess, to be had. Is there, I guess it would mostly be the plant list that might change for a drier landscape.
Yeah, that certainly would be the case. I'm sorry, did you say South Central? So down sort of along Columbia, but
exactly. Yeah.
East side of the Cascades.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have a different geology down there. So as well. I'm not aware of one. Anybody on the call that knows different, please chime in. I don't believe so. There is a stormwater management manual for Eastern Washington, specific to Eastern Washington. But yeah, that would be quite different as far as plants and how you might be implementing these. I'm not that familiar with that area, but if you have fractured bedrock, like around Spokane, for example, that would mean, some different approaches. You would want to be very careful about infiltrating water and that water reaching groundwater resources. So that would be one example of geology driving a different approach, a different set of guidelines. Do you know, is that region where you are, does it have that fractured bedrock geology, or is it different than that?
I don't know. I couldn't speak to that with any confidence. I'm just thinking about in town, I'm in White Salmon. We do have a lot of bedrock and, boulders, but, the size of a house type boulders. So there is a lot of that ground, I think, that's probably not going to infiltrate, or maybe it's like you're saying, it's fractured and it's going to get down to the groundwater faster. But yeah, that would be something I'd have to. So
if you're thinking about, if you're on this call or on this meeting because you're thinking about maybe this would be something valuable for our region, that's where I would start. The plants certainly, as you mentioned, but the other thing would be talking with someone that you might know, or a resource that's good with hydrogeology in the area. It just basically knows how water, fundamentally moves around in the environment. I'll give you one example. So if you are dealing with, say, a fractured bedrock where water can easily reach groundwater resources without, going through a soil profile, you'd want to be very careful about the media that you would use in your rain garden. You would probably not use a compost-based media. Okay. In fact, in that setting, I would say you would definitely not. You would be looking to a different type of media to put in the rain garden. So that would be an example of, there's a difference.
Yeah, that would be back towards maybe your point about if you're close to a stream, it's just too close to the water source to be putting that kind of medium in the bottom.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, we put compost in gardens because it has lots of nutrients in it and it's wonderful for growing plants. You just have to be conscious of using it in the right place. That nitrogen can then move pretty easily into groundwater, and that's just another example. So yeah, so you'd use it, and there are other kinds of media that you can use for certainly. So yeah.
Well, thank you. We do have a question in the chat from Peggy. She asked, what will be the process for organizations and agencies to order a bulk quantity of the printed 2023 edition? And what is the deadline date? And is there an anticipated cost per unit?
You want me to answer that, Haley? Kaylee's going to be helping to coordinate that. We haven't talked with the printer yet. We don't have a final copy yet. That will be happening in likely November. And so as soon as we have more information, we will let you know. So right now, Haley is simply collecting a list of jurisdictions and individuals who are interested. And then as soon as we have the details, she will be sending that out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Linda. And there was just a follow-up question, but sounds like it's along the same lines about whether or not they'd be received before the year end, but maybe just reach out to Haley to get on the list. And
yes, they will be received before year end.
Okay, great. And we have another question in the chat from Heidi. Is there a period of time after the initial installation of a rain garden where you need to block stormwater from entering the rain garden while plants establish themselves?
Haley, you want to take that one?
Sure. Is there a period of time actually? Oh, okay. I don't think so. Yeah, I would say something to consider is the timing of planting. So typically, the construction of rain gardens you want to do when the soil is dry, so in the summer months. But that doesn't align really well with what makes plants happy. So what we typically do is build the infrastructure of the rain garden in the summer and then plant around now, like when the rain is starting. And then that gives the plants like several months to get established before they're introduced to that drier, stressful season again. So I don't think you need to block the stormwater from entering necessarily, but if you're, I've heard some people using like 1 gallon plants or larger plants in that area that's going to get infiltrated in order to give the plants the most successful shot during their first wet season. But Curtis, do you have anything to add to that or edit?
No, that sounds good. I think generally not. If it's designed correctly, that the energy from that water entering the rain garden should be dissipated and should not be damaging those plants. Hopefully, if you have a gush of water coming through there, you might have some other design issues you want to look at, check dams or more rock on the inlet or something like that. But yeah. I think that's good.
Looks like Noah has a question and any maintenance considerations.
Sure. It's like a part of your garden. So plants require maintenance, especially when they're first installed. We generally recommend 2 or 3 years of watering the first year more regularly, and then that decreases as time goes on, but you're going to need to help those plants establish. If you've used a good mulch, your weed issue should be minimized, or well, I don't know about minimized, but it's really decreased. So but it's important really to maintain upfront and quickly when you see, especially during time when weeds are going to seed, to get to those beforehand. Once other plants, weeds and such get established, it gets harder and harder and harder to get rid of them. So if you want to keep it looking nice, regular weeding, and particularly up front, and again, hopefully sort of diminishing over time as the plants establish and capture the rain garden, and there's less opportunity for weeds to establish. Then and all these guidelines are in the handbook. It's important to, at certain times of the year, to be looking at your rain garden. For example, early or in fall, when leaves are coming off the trees, and you want to make sure they haven't sort of clogged up your inlet or your outlet. Simple stuff, really simple things. And again, as the rain garden gets established and you're confident in how it's behaving and performing, that maintenance will become fairly minimal. Haley, anything to add to that?
No, I think that covers it. Thanks, Curtis.
Just to follow up from Noah, are there any lessons learned from failures that you've seen?
Yeah, I can go first. One, this wasn't a lesson I learned, but it was passed down to me, is that one of the things that makes rain gardens successful is the media. And so I've seen or worked with someone who had a contractor who, after putting the media in, drove over it several times with an excavator and just really compacted the soil down. And so next to a rain garden that wasn't compacted, it functioned pretty differently. So just like keeping in mind soil compaction as you're building, to make sure you're not decreasing those air pockets.
And a couple of other questions. One, just follow up on the leaves idea, Curtis. In places other than the inflow and outflow, do the leaves need to be removed?
I think you see different levels of fastidiousness with that. I mean, I don't think that's critical. I think only if it gets to a level to where it's those leaves are, when water's coming into the system and those leaves are moving into a place where they clog something up, that those leaves are replacing organic matter in the soil, and I mean, they can be beneficial. But I think it's really a matter of how neat you want your rain garden to look, and just a lot of this is just watching and adapting. And if those leaves aren't causing any problem, the only time I will mention another issue that can happen with leaves, and particularly larger leaves, maple, for example, they can create a mat. And we've seen this in the engineered facilities where a bunch of leaves will move into the system, cover the bottom, and then so you'll get some sediment in there as well, and it creates a mat that water cannot move through, so it diminishes the infiltration. So that's another thing you might want to watch to make sure that that's just not happening with your rain garden. But some leaves in there, I think I think they'd be fine.
And another question, sort of building off of that idea, do toxins present in the stormwater accumulate in the media? And if so, do they represent a hazard to the landowner, or does the media potentially need to be replaced? Like, does it lose its ability to filter those contaminants over time?
Okay, so do we have another 2 or 3 hours? Yeah, that's a great question, and it's the subject of a lot of research out there around the world, and so I'll try to break it down into sort of classes of contaminants. Now, first of all, I want to say that for the most part, so these, rain gardens, for the most part that we're talking about, are on someone's property, an individual homeowner. The contaminant load from that area, I mean, unless they're really, they're, changing their oil on their driveway, and they're like, there's, dumping oil down the thing. The load of contaminants is fairly low. On aggregate, it can be quite large, but individual home, the individual property, it's fairly low. And the bioretention media is very good at dealing with that level of contaminant load. So that just overall, and can last for many, many, many years. Basically, hydrocarbons, oil, grease, that might be coming off a driveway. Those are transformed in a rain garden down to elemental form for the most part: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen. So those are transformed primarily through microbial activity. So those are transient contaminants and can be, again, it's not, I'm not talking about, an industrial site with a lot of contaminant, but off, let's say, a homeowner's driveway. Metals. So you might see metals off a roof. You might see those metals off a driveway. There could be other sources, but those might be I think would be the primary. Those are conservative, and those stay in the system primarily. But again, the load of metals is fairly low on a residential property, and rain garden can easily handle that. There are two pathways are taken up by microbes, and the other, those metals are surrounded by organic and mineral molecules. It's a process called chelation. So they're basically not available to move out of the system. They're captured and they're held in the system. So nutrients is another one. And again, we're putting nutrients in the system because we're using the compost-based media. It's going to be putting nutrients in the system for plant use. But if you have reasonably good soil underneath that, and again, you're not bordering a stream or wetland, those nutrients move into the surrounding soil, and they're utilized by other plants, it's captured in the soil. So the short of it, these can last for a long, long, long time, 20, 30 years. Particularly, I want to mention here too, these are plant soil systems, and the plants are part of that system, creating a system that's long lasting. It's a living system that can continue to regenerate. And again, as you might tell, like I said, we could go on for hours here, but I think we'll wrap it up there. Yeah.
Any other questions for Elia Curtis? We've got put it in the chat, or just feel free to raise your hand and speak directly as well if that works for you. Follow up here. If you put a rain garden in a highly toxic area, can you use plants as bioaccumulators of toxins for remediation?
That's challenging in our region. Possibly. It could be a system that's, designed for that. Just one sort of explanation here. Our plants are not that very active in the winter. They're not taking up a lot of contaminants because they're just not that active, as opposed to the Midwest, East Coast, where there's summer rains. Having said that, as those plants become active, they can be taking up contaminants. Where those systems have been designed, generally they're often using grasses, where the grass is cut. And I don't mean like necessarily a lawn. I mean more maybe taller grasses. NRCS actually has I see NRCS mentioned here. I don't know if there's someone here from NRCS, but NRCS has done a lot of work with contaminant uptake in grasses, actually hydraulic controls and pollutant uptake with grasses. And so they might be a really good source to talk to about this. But you'll probably be you'd be cutting those grasses back and removing that biomass with those contaminants. So that would be a highly that would very likely be a pretty sophisticated design and something that requires quite a bit of attention. That kind of setting. Again, the rain gardens that we're talking about here primarily on residential properties, lowish contaminant loads. The setting you're talking about there with an industrial, commercial, those are probably very likely going to be engineered and a higher maintenance system.
Yeah, if I could jump in to add, you're looking at like a sand filtration system, which would be engineered to specifically target the removal of toxins, which I think you talked about during the Foes Hill, correct? I think, Curtis, if you recall. But yeah, the rain gardens are not for remediation. You would do an engineered, almost like a wastewater treatment type of system.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that could be multi-stage, where you have pre-treatment because the water is quite dirty. Pre-treatment, then your primary filtration, and then even a polishing system after that. So we're talking about a different, much more sophisticated system. Not to say rain gardens aren't and don't do a great job. It's just that, when you move into an industrial setting and all that, it's really a whole nother deal.
Here's another question. Do you generally find that people and/or communities are wanting to implement more rain gardens or GSI and just missing some of the pieces, such as funding or information?
Haley,
you'd be the right person for that one.
Yeah, and Linda, jump in if you have anything to add. But I find in my conversations with landowners that the biggest piece for people is usually the physicality of excavating. They don't want to rent an excavator, so you have to dig that by hand, and that seems to be a limiting factor for homeowners, but completely doable. So, but yeah, Linda, do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I'd agree with your assessment. It's the cost usually, because and renting the excavator is generally the biggest concern for homeowners trying to do this themselves. But I do think they're interested. There's a lot of interest, and we get requests all the time for people asking for assistance. in designing and constructing rain gardens.
Those excavators, yeah, I could see the cost thing, but how fun is that to rent an excavator? You dig up a hole in your front yard. Yeah, especially if you have a teenager, that would be like, they'd be all over that. But they are expensive.
I really liked the idea of grouping them for that reason. That made a lot of sense when you said that, kind of finding a number of them to do close together so they can share some of that like mobilization costs and that piece, which is a big part of it. There's another question here. Are there any tax benefits associated with installing one if it leads to stormwater runoff abatement?
Never seen a tax benefit, Curtis, have you?
No, as you're well aware, the support, technical and cost support, but not any kind of tax. Although, that is kind of an interesting question because there might be some jurisdictions for your stormwater tax, right? I have a huge stormwater tax in my place because of Lake Whatcom, right? I'm in Bellingham. So Lake Whatcom is a huge, there's a huge need there for work and retrofitting and all that. So there's a big tax for stormwater here in Bellingham. So there might be some jurisdictions that provide some tax benefit for stormwater tax benefit, but I don't know of any specifically.
Other questions for Haley or Curtis?
I see a mosquito question. I know.
Yes.
Have you had any complaints about mosquitoes?
I've had that question before. If you have standing water for a long period of time, it can certainly promote mosquitoes, but the idea of the rain garden is that they're going to drain. So it's not usually a concern.
Yep.
And another question here, have you seen many system failures?
I have not. Have you, Curtis?
Not rain gardens. Had some interesting things come up with the engineered systems, but that's a different deal, with, building them along arterials or whatever, right? I mean, how's getting the water in and, things like that. So, but not rain gardens.
Haley, I'm going to put your email in the chat here again, just to make sure everybody has it in order to get a hold of you about the handbook itself. If they want to order.
Great, thank you.
Any final questions? We did have a comment from Mike that I think stormwater tax is based upon impervious area on your property. So if you're reducing the impervious area, you may be able to apply for a tax reduction. That might be is in there. We have another question. Instead of diverting the outflow to the drain, is it safe to collect it for use in a flower or vegetable garden?
Yeah, I have seen systems that that direct stormwater to like an orchard or yeah, specific trees. But that usually takes a little more yeah, a little more planning and a lot of like intentional planning goes into that. It's more like earthworks, a rain garden overflowing into like almost like a terraced earthwork system. And but generally, no, you don't want to include like edible plants like in the rain garden in the zones that are infiltrated by the stormwater pretty consistently. So like zone 1, that like really wet bottom, and then zone 2 around the edges, you might not want to grow food crops. But I have known a lot of people to do like blueberries and other crops that aren't touching the water in the zone 3, that like outer rim that rarely gets inundated by stormwater. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Heidi.
Okay, well, I think we might have reached a critical mass for our questions here. Mike has a comment. Snohomish CD developed a rain barrel manual for use in planting for irrigating gardens or flower beds. So that might be a better fit for repurposing that water.
Yeah.
Situation. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your presentation today. And again, for bringing this to the CTD to help promote. So yeah, we look forward to seeing the updated handbook. And I know at least if I'm going to do anything in my area, I've got some reading to do. New to me. So thanks so much, you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you, Jan, for organizing and facilitating things. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, take care.
Everyone. Bye.